introduce myself.
Yeah.
Well, I'm John Springer. I've lived in the Aurora area my entire life, other than times when I was in college and time in the military. I entered the Army on May 8th of 1963, and I was in for just a little bit under 2 years, and I was inducted in Omaha, Nebraska, at Fort Omaha, onto Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri for basic training, and then to Fort Sill, Oklahoma for advanced training, and also preparation for going overseas. I was in a Pershing missile unit. Part of the time was TDY, which is temporary duty in Fort Wingate, New Mexico, where we actually fired 4 of the Pershing missiles into White Sands and then back to Fort Sill, Oklahoma for some additional testing and that, and then we went by boat to Bremerhaven, Germany, and then by train down to Frankfurt, and then over to town of Mainz in the McCully Barracks, which was in a little town just outside of Mainz.
Okay. Well, were you drafted or did you enlist in?
I was drafted,
Yeah.
yes.
How old were you when you were drafted into the military?
I was 23.
Do you recall your first days in service? Like,
You mean like in basic training? Or?
well, like being actually deployed
Um,
or actually serving?
Well, the first thing was going through basic training, which was all kinds of, they gave us a lot of tests for aptitude to determine what we were capable or not capable of doing. And it was physical PT type training, military courtesy, weapons instruction, qualifying on, at that time it was the M1 rifle, what we were issued, and that's pretty much what basic training was about.
Tell me a little bit more about like boot camp and your all your training experience.
Well, boot camp was pretty tough. They wanted to make sure that we followed orders, that we understood discipline, and I was chosen in basic training for a truck driving position, I suppose mainly because I had driven vehicles a lot. There are a lot of guys here that had never driven anything from the bigger cities. It's interesting. But I didn't realize how fortunate I was to have that position, because that exempted me from KP, which is kitchen police, and also for guard duty. And kitchen police was a matter of washing pots and pans and trays and all that kind of things. And so I didn't know how unpopular that position was until I got in my advanced unit, and then I had to pull KP. So, but otherwise, probably the thing that I disliked most in basic training was bayonet training, and it was mainly the idea of what that would lead to if you had to use that on the enemy. It would be just next to hand-to-hand combat, and so that's was be a rather difficult position to be in. But we were trained because there was potential for that to happen.
How did you get through it? Did you ever think of giving up? And
well, really, giving up wasn't an option.
Yeah.
Unless you wanted to really mess up and get a dishonorable discharge, which would be something you didn't want. And so just well, partly the encouragement from my family and my prayers of my parents and family at home. So.
What do they teach you the most in service?
Well, I think probably discipline would be one of the more important things. Just to obey orders and do the best you can and what your job is.
You mentioned that. Did you serve in you mentioned something about like the Vietnam War? Like it was early.
Yes,
early
Vietnam was just when I got out. Vietnam was really heating up in 1965, and I was a little fearful that I might get called back in, but fortunately that didn't happen. But Vietnam was not a good situation.
And did you see combat at all?
No.
Well, what were your did you get awarded any medals or like citations?
Well, awards that I had qualified for the M1 as a sharpshooter and a sharpshooter for the M14, both rifles. And I did have some experience with a .45 caliber pistol, but then my job changed, and so I did not carry a .45. Then I went back to the M14.
How did you get promoted over time?
Well, you start out as a private E1, and then you go to after 8 weeks. I think it's 8 weeks. You go to a private E2, and then after about 8 months, you just automatically a private first class, and that gives you your first stripe on your arm. And then after that, depending on the allocations that they have, you can get promoted to. Most of the guys are specialist fourth class. It's the same equivalent or pay grade as a corporal, but that was what was my final rank then, and the patch is kind of a bird type patch on your shoulder that was specialist fourth class.
While you were in service, did you ever feel like pressure or stress?
Sometimes, yes.
How did people like entertain themselves while you guys had nothing going on?
There was facilities on the post that there was a library there, and you could go there and read, and there was a gym. You could go down there and shoot baskets in wintertime, or go out and play ball. And I think I mentioned earlier that we had a dark room in the service club there that we developed quite a few pictures, and there wasn't too much more to do on post, and guys would go off down into Mainz, and but that was far enough. You couldn't walk that far, and you didn't have any other form of transportation other than standing by the gate and hitchhiking. Hope somebody would take you down there, and somebody else would bring you back, or you'd bring a taxi back, but that was expensive. So.
What did you do when you were on leave?
Well, in States, when I was on leave, I came home, and the furthest I was from home was Fort Sill, Oklahoma, which was about around 500 miles, and so I could drive that in a day. And when I was home, I would help on the farm.
Do you remember like any particularly like humorous or unusual events?
Oh, I think I mentioned one to you the other day about air mattresses.
Yeah.
We did a lot of field exercises, and a lot of it was overnight stuff. And we would air up our air mattresses on the air tanks off of our trucks that had air brakes. And some of the guys overinflated their mattresses, and they had ribs in, and the ribs would pop out, and that was just a big donut, or not donut, but a big weenie type thing. And anyway, enough of that happened that a commanding officer issued a notice that nobody else was to use air tanks to fill their air mattresses. Well, one night we'd had a busy day, a long day, and I was out. Didn't think anybody else was around, so I crawled under my truck and aired up my mattress down there. As I started to get out, I could see somebody was standing right by the truck. I rolled out, and there stood my platoon sergeant glaring down at me, and I thought, oh boy, here goes. But he stood there for about 30 seconds, and he says, "You got any air down there?" And I said, "Yeah." So he had his hands behind his back. He pulled out an air mattress and threw it down. "Fill her up," he said. So you never disobey a commanding of a superior, order from a superior. So anyway, that was one. And the boat ride over was pretty good. The boat ride back was very rough. We were in bunks 4 deep, and there was so bad some nights in laying in my bunk that I was afraid to go to sleep for fear that with the pitching of the boat I'd get rolled out. But I was able to stay in there. But most of us were sick on the way back. It was not an enjoyable trip.
Did you ever make like any close friendships while you were in service?
Yeah, I had 2 guys I corresponded with for quite some time. One was a section chief or sergeant. I'd get a Christmas card from him every year for a number of years, and I'd usually write a note. And then they stopped coming, and I assumed that he had passed away because he was some older than I. And had another friend that I hadn't heard from. It was almost 40 years later. I got a call from him one night, and we visited for quite a while. He had retired from the U.S. Forest Service, and so. But then I hadn't heard from him. The number I called to try and reach him was an unlisted, or not an unlisted, but a non-working number. So I suspect maybe he's not living anymore either. But I don't know that for sure. But those were.
Do you recall the day your service ended, and where were you?
Okay, we got off the ship in the Brooklyn Army Terminal, and they bussed us over to Fort Hamilton, New York, and then we went through all the paperwork, and they paid us in travel pay, and I went somewhere. I remember to a restaurant, and first of all I lined up a ticket from New York back through Chicago and Omaha and Lincoln, Grand Island, and then I remember I went to that restaurant there, and I had a steak for supper that night, which was the first steak I'd had in a long time, and so that was kind of the day that I remember.
What did you do like in the days and the weeks afterward?
I just went right into farming. It was in about first part of March, and it was too early to be in the field yet, but we had livestock, and so I was just caring for them and preparing to equipment to get ready for farming. And
Was your education like ever supported by the GI Bill? I think you mentioned like you did.
no, I had already been through college, and I think I mentioned to you I did have they call it a certificate of eligibility. That I still do have a pilot's license, and that would have paid 90% of my training for a commercial license and an instrument rating. But at that time there wasn't an airport here at Aurora yet, and I would have had to gone to Grand Island for all that, and it just time didn't allow that, so I never pursued that anymore.
Did your military experience ever influence your thinking about war or about military in general?
Well, war is a terrible thing. The military, it's very important that our country needs a military to be strong, because we found that out. World War I, World War II, particularly when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, and really, that's what really sent us into the war, both with Germany and with Japan. And both Germany and Japan were hoping to conquer the world, really. And so that was why I feel that the military is necessary.
Is there anything else you would like to add that we have not covered in this interview?
I guess I don't think of anything right now. So,
All right, that's it. Thank you, John.
Okay, well, thank you. So.